Welcome, starry-eyed patrons of the silver screen, to the automated booking desk of the criminal justice system. For Part 1, The Hollywood Arrest, a clinical, exhaustive, and deeply cynical deconstruction of the cinematic fantasies, theatrical courtroom dramas, and police procedures that have systematically rotted the public's understanding of actual law enforcement and constitutional rights. Hollywood has spent a century conditioning you to believe that the criminal underworld operates on a set of clean, dramatic, and almost gentlemanly rules, ensuring that every encounter with the law is packaged with a convenient plot device. We initiate this forensic audit by shattering the foundational jailhouse dogma of myth number 1, the deeply entrenched, unscientific belief in the legendary one phone call rule. Every cinematic rogue or misunderstood hero dragged into a police station barks at the desk sergeant that they demand their single, legally guaranteed call. Let us consult the cold parameters of administrative custody. There is no federal statute, constitutional amendment, or universal Bill of Rights that grants an arrested citizen exactly one phone call. In the bleak reality of the booking room, phone access is an administrative courtesy, completely at the custody officer's discretion. Depending on your level of compliance, the mood of the shift supervisor, and the specific municipal regulations of the precinct, you might be granted 0 calls for hours, or conversely, you might be allowed to sit with a desk phone dialing numbers until a relative answers. If the police suspect that a phone call will allow you to tip off co-conspirators or destroy evidence, the phone remains locked away, proving that your singular dramatic lifeline is nothing more than a convenient Hollywood prop designed to advance the plot to a lawyer's office. This legal confusion easily transitions from the booking desk straight back to the initial street encounter, bringing us to the constitutional illusions of myth number 2, the absolute, near-universal doctrine that police officers must read your Miranda rights immediately during a physical arrest, or the entire case is thrown out and you walk free instantly. We have watched it 1,000 times. The detective snaps the handcuffs on the villain while rapidly reciting the right to remain silent, implying that the magic words are a prerequisite for the arrest itself. Let us restore actual constitutional law to this theatre. A quiet, completely silent arrest, where not a single word is read to you, is perfectly valid. The United States Supreme Court dictated that Miranda warnings are only legally required prior to a custodial interrogation, meaning when the police have you confined and are actively questioning you about the crime. If the arresting officers have already gathered enough physical evidence or eyewitness testimony to charge you, they can lock you in a cell for months without ever reading you your rights, because they have no intention of interrogating you. The only penalty for failing to read the warnings is that any statement you volunteer during interrogation cannot be used against you in court. It does not erase the crime, it does not invalidate the handcuffs, and thousands of convicted criminals are currently serving life sentences without ever hearing the phrase, "You have the right to remain silent." The pathologizing of police operational boundaries reaches an equally absurd peak when we examine the rules of deception, dismantling the comforting trap of myth number 3, the proud, streetwise consensus that if you ask an undercover police officer if they are a cop, they are legally required to tell you the truth. Small-time cinematic drug dealers always look their customers in the eye and demand a confession, operating under the naive assumption that the badge forces absolute honesty. Let us expose the material realities of espionage law. Undercover agents and informants are not only legally allowed to lie, cheat, create fictional identities, and participate in peripheral criminal activity, they are actively trained to do so by their agencies to protect the integrity of multi-year investigations and, more importantly, to keep themselves from being executed in a dark alley. The legal doctrine of entrapment only applies if an officer coerces or forces an otherwise innocent person to commit a crime they had no prior intention of committing. It does not apply simply because an officer wore a wire, adopted a fake persona, and looked you in the face to tell you a lie, proving that the undercover cop rule is a classic piece of criminal folklore engineered by screenwriters to give stupid characters a false sense of security. This systemic distortion of emergency response boundaries takes an even more tragic path when we examine the protocols for missing persons, leading us directly to the administrative fictions of myth number 4. The widespread, highly authoritative claim that you must wait exactly 24 or 48 hours before filing a missing person report with local law enforcement. We have all seen the grieving cinematic relative turned away from a police station by a cold, checked-out desk officer who points to a clock and tells them to come back tomorrow. Let us expose the dangerous reality of this protocol. No such waiting period exists anywhere in the modern legal framework. In fact, the first few hours after an individual vanishes are the most critical for tracking digital footprints, locating eyewitnesses, and preserving physical evidence. Police departments are legally obligated to accept and evaluate missing person cases immediately, especially when they involve minors, elderly individuals, or suspicious circumstances. Artificially waiting 48 hours is a tragic cinematic convention designed solely to allow the protagonist to conduct their own vigilante investigation, replacing critical public safety protocols with cheap, prolonged script suspense. The dangerous application of cinematic physics reaches its most volatile peak when characters encounter a locked door, bringing us to the ballistic illusions of myth number 5, the dogmatic assertion that shooting a padlock or heavy deadbolt with a handgun is a clean, reliable, and instantaneous way to break open a locked door. The action hero steps up, fires a single round from a revolver into a steel padlock, and kicks the door open with a dramatic flourish. Let us apply basic metallurgy and ballistics to this fantasy. A standard handgun bullet is made of soft lead or thin copper jacketing, while high-quality commercial padlocks and deadbolts are constructed from hardened, heat-treated steel. When a handgun round strikes that hardened surface, the bullet does not miraculously shear the lock in half. It instantly shatters into a cloud of lethal shrapnel or ricochets wildly off the curved steel, spraying high-velocity metal fragments directly back into the shooter's face and chest. Meanwhile, the kinetic energy of the impact frequently bends the internal pins of the lock, permanently jamming the mechanism shut and ensuring that the door is now far more secure and difficult to open than it was before you pulled the trigger. This complete disregard for physical acoustics is perfectly mirrored in the stealth operations of the action genre, bringing us straight to the muffled deceptions of myth number 6, the widespread, highly trusting belief that gun silencers reduce the deafening explosion of a firearm to a whisper-quiet metallic hiss that can escape detection in a crowded room. The cinematic assassin slips a black tube onto their pistol, fires a shot down a hallway, and walks away unnoticed as the weapon emits a faint puff of air. Let us measure the actual decibel parameters of a suppressed firearm. A standard handgun discharge operates at roughly 160 decibels, a level of sound pressure that causes instantaneous, permanent ear damage. A high-quality suppression device, which works by slowly dissipating the expanding gases behind the bullet, reduces that sound signature by roughly 30 decibels, dropping the output to about 130 decibels. To put that in perspective, 130 decibels is still as loud as a commercial jackhammer, a military jet takeoff, or a stadium rock concert speaker. It is fully capable of being heard through multiple concrete walls and will cause permanent hearing loss with prolonged exposure, proving that a silencer does not make a weapon silent. It merely changes a deafening, recognizable gunshot into a slightly less deafening industrial boom. Finally, we decode the ultimate telecommunication deception of the classic detective thriller, exposing the countdown illusions of myth number 7. The widespread belief that police trace units require a suspect to remain on a phone call for exactly 60 seconds to successfully trace their physical location. The protagonist stretches out the conversation, watching a digital progress bar creep toward the 1-minute mark, while the technician frantically types on a keyboard. Let us examine the actual engineering of digital routing. The moment a telephone connection is established, whether it is an old analog copper wire or a modern digital cellular tower, the switching systems instantly record the routing data, origin points, and cell tower pings required to identify the caller's location. The physical trace is instantaneous. The entire 60-second clock was a lazy Hollywood plot device engineered in the mid-20th century solely to give characters a reason to talk to the villain, creating artificial tension out of an administrative process that takes less than a millisecond. We push open the heavy double doors of the county courthouse and step directly into the wood-paneled arena of the legal system to begin Part 2, the courtroom circus, a clinical, forensic, and deeply cynical cross-examination of the performative illusions, theatrical speeches, and procedural fantasies that Hollywood utilizes to transform a dry, administrative bureaucracy into a high-stakes morality play. Modern cinema has conditioned the public to view the trial process as a battle of wits where rules are mere suggestions, and the loudest, most charismatic orator walks away with a triumphant verdict. We initiate this forensic deconstruction by dismantling the foundational dramatic climax of the movie trial, exposing the absolute structural impossibilities of myth number 8, the deeply popular belief that attorneys can dramatically present surprise physical evidence or call a shock witness in the middle of a trial to instantly win a case. The cinematic prosecutor walks into the courtroom at the 11th hour, holding a mysterious manila envelope that completely upends the proceedings, while the defense collapses in terror. Let us restore the tedious reality of pre-trial discovery rules to this theatre. Under modern legal frameworks, surprise is the ultimate sin. Both the prosecution and the defense are legally mandated to participate in an exhaustive exchange of information months before a single juror is selected. Every scrap of paper, every fingerprint report, and the name of every single witness must be disclosed to the opposing side in advance. Attempting to spring a surprise witness or drop an unlisted piece of physical evidence on the stand will not result in a dramatic confession. It will result in the immediate exclusion of the evidence by the judge and severe judicial sanctions for the offending attorney, turning your silver screen victory into a humiliating career-ending reprimand. This systematic demand for procedural perfection easily transitions from evidence to administrative paperwork, bringing us directly to the clerical myths of myth number 9, the absolute cultural dogma that dangerous criminals regularly get off on a technicality because of minor administrative typos, such as a misspelled street name on a search warrant or an incorrect middle initial on an arrest record. We have watched it 1,000 times in cinema. The smug defense attorney points to a stray typographical error, the judge sighs dramatically, bangs the gavel, and a violent offender walks out the front doors of the courthouse. Let us correct this administrative fantasy. The modern judicial system does not collapse over a typo. Under the well-established good faith exception and the harmless error doctrine, courts look at whether an administrative mistake was made intentionally or if it fundamentally violated the defendant's constitutional rights. If a clerical error is minor and the police acted in good faith with a valid reason to conduct their investigation, the warrant remains completely intact. The trial proceeds as scheduled because the law is designed to evaluate substantive evidence, ensuring that a simple spelling error by a tired police clerk almost never collapses an entire criminal prosecution. The performative behavior of movie lawyers takes an equally aggressive hit when we examine the actual physical constraints of a courtroom, dismantling the physical theatrics of myth number 10, the widespread, highly authoritative assumption that lawyers regularly pace around the courtroom, lean intimately over the jury box, and yell passionately at trembling witnesses during cross-examination. Cinematic attorneys utilize the entire room as their personal stage, pacing like caged predators to build tension. Let us restore actual courtroom decorum to this performance. In a real court of law, the judge maintains absolute control over the physical environment. In many jurisdictions, attorneys are legally confined to standing directly behind their designated counsel table or inside a fixed lectern. Any unauthorized wandering, approaching a witness without explicit judicial permission, or attempting to stand close to the jury box is strictly prohibited. Furthermore, theatrical screaming, badgering, and dramatic finger-pointing are swiftly cut down by immediate objections and warnings from the bench, proving that a real lawyer who attempts to replicate Hollywood's dramatic movement would find themselves swiftly charged with contempt of court and escorted straight to a holding cell by a bailiff. The complete misunderstanding of legal terms reaches an even more volatile peak when trials are cut short, bringing us to the procedural deceptions of myth number 11, the common, reassuring belief that declaring a mistrial immediately exonerates the defendant, setting them free under the constitutional protection against double jeopardy. The movie judge discovers a structural error, declares a mistrial, and the hero celebrates their freedom on the courthouse steps, assuming the battle is over. Let us expose the dark reality of procedural resets. A mistrial is not an acquittal. It is simply a legal declaration that the current proceedings are void due to a deadlocked jury, a technical error, or attorney misconduct. Double jeopardy protection only prevents a person from being tried twice for the same crime after they have been officially acquitted or convicted. When a mistrial is declared, the slate is wiped clean, but the charges remain completely active. The prosecution is left entirely free to reschedule the trial, select a brand new jury, re-indict the defendant, and run the entire prosecution from the very beginning, turning the dramatic, cinematic victory into an exhausting, multi-year financial loop of legal fees and prolonged anxiety. This inflation of the trial experience is perfectly mirrored in the statistical illusions of the system, bringing us straight to the elite realities of myth number 12, the constitutional dogma that every accused citizen receives a dramatic, high-stakes trial in front of a jury of their peers. Hollywood portrays the jury trial as the standard, universal pathway of American justice, implying that every crime involves 12 citizens weighing evidence in a tense courtroom. Let us look at the cold corporate balance sheet of the justice system. Over 95% of both state and federal criminal cases never see a jury, a witness, or a dramatic closing argument. Instead, they are resolved behind closed doors through the transactional process of plea bargaining. The modern justice system is an assembly line that would completely collapse under its own weight if every case went to trial. Prosecutors utilize the threat of massive, maximum sentences to pressure defendants into pleading guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a guaranteed, shorter sentence. The constitutional right to a jury trial has been effectively reduced to a rare, incredibly expensive luxury reserved almost exclusively for the exceptionally wealthy or the pathologically defiant, transforming Hollywood's grand democratic ritual into a routine bureaucratic transaction. This misunderstanding of institutional loops reaches its most dangerous point when we analyze psychiatric defenses, leading us directly to the clinical myths of myth number 13, the absolute consensus that not guilty by reason of insanity is an easy, highly exploitable legal loophole that criminals regularly use to escape punishment and go home free. The cinematic villain puts on an elaborate act of madness, fools the jury, and smiles as they walk out of the courtroom. Let us subject this trope to actual legal statistics. The insanity defense is raised in less than 1% of all criminal cases across the country, and when it is raised, it fails over 75% of the time. Juries are profoundly skeptical of the claim, and the legal definition of insanity requires proving the defendant completely lacked the capacity to understand the wrongfulness of their actions. More importantly, winning an insanity defense does not grant freedom. An acquittal by reason of insanity results in the immediate, automatic, and indefinite commitment of the individual to a high-security forensic psychiatric institution. In these sterile, chemically managed facilities, there are no fixed release dates. Release requires proving you are no longer a danger to society, resulting in individuals serving far longer terms locked inside a psychiatric ward, than they ever would have served in a standard state prison. Finally, we dismantle the ultimate economic fantasy of the civil justice system, exposing the litigation deceptions of myth number 14, the widespread belief that you can easily sue any business or individual for millions of dollars over a minor personal inconvenience or accidental injury and win a massive jackpot overnight. Pop culture loves to depict the civil courts as a lottery system, where a simple slip on a wet floor instantly results in a multi-million-dollar payout. Let us examine the actual grueling parameters of tort law. Frivolous lawsuits built on minor inconveniences are routinely dismissed by judges before they ever reach a courtroom. Proving a valid personal injury case requires establishing actual, measurable economic damages, direct corporate negligence, and clear liability. This process involves a grueling, multi-year financial battle against corporate defense firms that possess nearly infinite resources to delay, appeal, and drain the plaintiff's finances. Even in the rare event of a large jury verdict, statutory damage caps routinely slash the final payout to a fraction of the original headline number, proving that the multi-million-dollar civil jackpot is an elaborate cinematic myth that masks an exhausting, financially devastating system. We step out of the wood-paneled courtrooms and cross the sterile, fluorescent-lit threshold of the State Forensic Institute to begin Part 3, the lab and the lab coat, an unsparing, highly clinical, and forensic dismantling of the scientific illusions, technological miracles, and laboratory fantasies that Hollywood utilizes to paint the criminal investigation as a flawless, objective machine. The silver screen has spent decades constructing the myth of the infallible white coat, convincing the viewing public that a drop of sweat, a smudged fingerprint, or a grainy security video can instantly resolve the messy, chaotic realities of human violence. We initiate this forensic autopsy by tearing down the absurd, omnipresent cinematic archetype of the all-knowing investigator, exposing the structural impossibilities of myth number 15, the absolute delusion that the same exact forensic technician who sweeps the crime scene also conducts complex chemical lab analysis, interrogates psychological suspects, and kicks down doors to arrest armed bad guys. We have watched this hyper-competent hero slip a fiber into a vial, look up from a microscope, and immediately lead a SWAT team into a warehouse. Let us restore the tedious reality of institutional division of labor to this fantasy. In the actual criminal justice apparatus, these roles are locked into entirely separate, highly insulated bureaucratic silos. The technician who photographs footprints is a low-level field collector who rarely enters the analytical laboratory. The laboratory chemist who runs the gas chromatography machines is a civilian scientist who never interrogates a human being and has no legal authority to make an arrest. The detective who conducts the interview is a sworn officer who understands case law but would likely ruin a mass spectrometer by touching it, a separation intentionally designed to prevent cognitive bias and protocol contamination from ruining the integrity of a trial. This operational insulation is completely obliterated by the computational fantasies of the screen, bringing us directly to the biometric deceptions of myth number 16, the absolute, unquestioned belief that fingerprints are absolute, unique, and infallible biological markers that an advanced computer matching system can instantly scan to display a bright green match screen alongside a suspect's smiling portrait. The cinematic investigator feeds a partial print into a computer, watches millions of images spin on a screen, and smiles as a voice module confirms a perfect biological tie. Let us subject this computational theater to the subjective realities of latent print analysis. In the real world, criminals do not neatly press their inked fingers onto pristine glass surfaces. Crime scenes yield partial, distorted, and smudged smudges mixed with dust, moisture, and overlapping textures. The process of matching these prints is not performed by a sentient computer, but by human examiners who visually count ridge characteristics. This human evaluation is profoundly vulnerable to cognitive bias, background pressure, and professional peer influence. Multiple scientific audits have demonstrated that when the same exact latent print is presented to the same examiner with different contextual stories about the suspect, the examiner will frequently change their conclusion, proving that fingerprinting is an interpretive art prone to alarming rates of false positives. The myth of the easy biological trail extends deep into the molecular world, bringing us straight to the genetic illusions of myth number 17. The dogmatic assumption that DNA evidence is readily left at every single crime scene, waiting to be easily gathered, swept into a tube, and analyzed to provide a definitive answer. Hollywood portrays the human body as a genetic sprinkler, constantly shedding pristine, easily harvestable cellular profiles on every surface it touches. Let us look at the fragile biology of environmental degradation. Finding usable, uncontaminated, and informative DNA at a standard messy crime scene is a rare logistical luxury. DNA is rapidly degraded, sheared, and rendered useless by common everyday factors, including direct sunlight, heat, humidity, and the presence of common household cleaning chemicals. Furthermore, most real-world DNA samples gathered by police are complex, messy mixtures containing the cellular material of 3, 4, or 5 completely unrelated individuals who touched the same doorknob over a week, making it biochemically impossible to isolate a single, definitive criminal profile, ensuring that the vast majority of successful prosecutions still rely on old-fashioned, unscientific, circumstantial evidence. This genetic fantasy is further amplified by the database miracles of myth number 18, the administrative illusion that national DNA databases like CODIS return instant matches containing a suspect's full legal name, mugshot, and current physical address in a matter of minutes. The cinematic technician hits enter, walks away to pour a cup of coffee, and returns to find the suspect's entire life history printed out on the screen. Let us expose the grueling bureaucratic backlogs of state laboratories. Processing a DNA sample is a multi-step chemical extraction and amplification process that requires specialized equipment and strict chain-of-custody protocols. Because state forensic labs are chronically underfunded and overwhelmed, standard non-violent DNA evidence routinely sits in storage lockers for months or even years before a technician ever opens the bag. When a profile is finally run through the national database, the system does not spit out a name or a picture. It merely returns a cold string of numerical values representing specific genetic loci. If that numerical string does not already exist in the database from a prior convicted felon, the system returns absolutely nothing, leaving the investigator with a genetic ghost. The technological manipulation of physical laws reaches its most absurd peak when characters look at a screen, bringing us to the digital miracles of myth number 19. The hilarious, highly persistent belief that digital investigators can magically enhance low-resolution, blurry security camera footage to read a license plate or see a killer's reflection in a victim's pupil from a mile away. The detective barks the word "enhance" at a technician, who taps a single key to transform a pixelated block of grey sludge into a sharp portrait. Let us apply the unyielding laws of optics and digital imaging to this Hollywood trope. A digital photograph is composed of a fixed grid of pixels that capture light data at the exact moment the lens opens. If a security camera records a distant object as a 4-pixel block of grey, there is no software on Earth that can extract details from those pixels. Magnifying the image merely enlarges the existing squares of grey, creating a larger, more useless block of blurry pixels. You cannot create optical data that was never captured by the physical sensor, transforming Hollywood's digital enhancement into a complete violation of physics. This visual theatre is perfectly mirrored in the chemical illusions of the field test, bringing us to the glowing deceptions of myth number 20, the uncritical belief that spraying luminol reveals glowing, bright blue bloodstains permanently, proving a violent crime occurred in a cleaned room. The detective darkens the room, sprays a mist, and the entire floor glows with an eerie, permanent neon light. Let us analyze the volatile chemistry of this compound. The chemiluminescent reaction of luminol is incredibly brief, producing a faint, watery blue glow that lasts for barely 30 seconds, requiring investigators to sit in pitch darkness with long-exposure cameras just to capture a faint record. More importantly, luminol is an incredibly non-specific reactant. It does not simply react to hemoglobin. It reacts aggressively to common household bleach, copper pipes, rust, urine, and common vegetable enzymes found in leftover food. A kitchen floor that glows bright blue under luminol is not proof of a brutal murder. It is frequently just proof that the homeowner recently cleaned their tile with standard bleach or spilled a glass of tomato juice, creating a minefield of false positives. Finally, we confront the ultimate real-world consequence of this cinematic brainwashing, exposing the psychological fallout of myth number 21, the institutional phenomenon known to prosecutors as the CSI effect. By consuming thousands of hours of highly dramatized, scientifically flawless crime shows, real-world citizens walked into jury boxes completely conditioned to demand flawless, high-tech scientific evidence for the most basic criminal cases. If the prosecution does not present a pristine DNA profile, a matching fingerprint, and a three-dimensional digital recreation of the crime, modern juries will routinely experience severe doubt, resulting in the wrongful acquittal of violent offenders, despite the existence of overwhelming, rock-solid circumstantial evidence and eyewitness testimony, demonstrating that Hollywood's scientific fantasies did not just distort the truth on the screen. They successfully managed to break the functional reality of human justice inside our actual courts of law. We step into the claustrophobic, shadow-drenched confines of the police station basement to begin Part 4, the interrogation room, a cold, clinical, and forensic audit of the psychological traps, behavioral deceptions, and investigative fabrications that Hollywood uses to justify the absolute supremacy of the confession culture. The silver screen has spent decades framing the small, windowless interrogation room as a sacred space where intuitive detectives utilize genius mind games, high-tech sensors, and physical pressure to force the truth out of the most hardened criminal minds. We initiate this forensic exposure by shattering the ultimate corporate biometric deception of modern detective fiction. Tearing down the false infallibility of myth number 22, the absolute, widespread belief that lie detector tests, or polygraphs, are highly accurate, scientifically objective machines whose results are fully admissible as definitive evidence in a court of law. The cinematic investigator hooks up the suspect to a series of rubber tubes and needles, watching a scrolling paper chart drop a sharp spike the moment a lie is spoken, establishing instant guilt. Let us subject this machine to basic biological reality. A polygraph is not a lie detector. It is a rudimentary stress monitor that merely measures autonomic nervous system responses, specifically your heart rate, respiration, blood pressure, and galvanic skin resistance. If a cold, unfeeling sociopath tells a massive lie without an ounce of empathy, the needles remain perfectly still. Conversely, if an entirely innocent, hyper-anxious citizen is strapped to a chair and asked if they committed a brutal murder, their heart will naturally hammer against their ribs, causing the machine to flag them as a pathologically deceitful monster. Because the system measures emotion rather than truth, it is easily manipulated by simple physical countermeasures, which is why polygraph results are completely banned from almost every single modern courtroom across the civilized world. This reliance on compromised metrics easily transitions into the psychological maneuvers utilized by investigators, bringing us directly to the coercive theaters of myth number 23, the uncritical cultural dogma that aggressive, deceptive psychological tactics, like the classic good cop/bad cop routine, are highly reliable ways to secure truthful, voluntary confessions. We have watched the performance 1,000 times. One detective screams, kicks chairs, and threatens the suspect with a lifetime of prison violence, only for their partner to walk in with a warm cup of coffee and an empathetic smile, offering a gentle pathway to confession. Let us analyze the systemic reality of modern custodial isolation. Intense, prolonged psychological manipulation does not magically sift truth from falsehood. It simply breaks the operational capacity of the human mind. Under the weight of sleep deprivation, continuous gaslighting, and the manufactured terror of a hostile environment, vulnerable suspects, mentally disabled individuals, and exhausted innocents will routinely experience a cognitive collapse. They become so desperate to escape the immediate, crushing pressure of the room that their brains accept a short-term survival strategy. They confess to heinous crimes they never committed, falsely assuming that the court system will sort out the mistake later, turning Hollywood's brilliant tactical theater into the single greatest engine for manufacturing false confessions in the history of police work. The theatrical staging of the crime scene itself suffers from an equally absurd aesthetic delusion, dismantling the pictorial markers of myth number 24, the absolute, rigid, cinematic convention that detectives draw neat, white chalk outlines around deceased bodies on the ground at every single crime scene. The moment a cinematic detective arrives, the camera frames a perfect, cartoonish chalk silhouette printed on the pavement, implying that the police immediately trace the corpse before moving it. Let us restore standard forensic protocol to this performance. Drawing a chalk line around a body is a complete procedural impossibility that would get a real technician fired instantly. Chalk is a highly powdery, foreign chemical substance. Dragging it around a fresh corpse would aggressively contaminate the primary scene, destroying trace fibers, covering microscopic blood splatters, and obliterating critical DNA evidence before it could ever be collected. The legendary chalk outline is an entirely theatrical invention, born out of early stage plays and black and white cinema to visually communicate to an audience where a body used to be, without showing graphic violence. Whereas real modern forensic investigation relies on untouched digital photography, laser scanners, and three-dimensional spatial mapping to preserve the geometry of death. The search for a chemical shortcut to the human conscience takes an equally fantastical turn when we enter the laboratory, bringing us to the pharmaceutical illusions of myth number 25. The absolute belief that chemical truth serums, like sodium pentothal, force suspects to speak the absolute, unvarnished truth under a state of clinical hypnosis. The cinematic spy or hard-nosed detective injects a clear fluid into the villain's arm, watching their eyes roll back as they mechanically recite passwords, coordinates, and hidden locations. Let us analyze the actual pharmacology of these heavy barbiturates. Compounds like sodium pentothal do not possess a biochemical homing mechanism for truth. They are simply powerful central nervous system depressants that lower overall cognitive inhibitions and put the brain into a state of severe twilight sedation. In this highly disoriented state, the human mind does not become an objective database. It becomes incredibly suggestible, highly confused, and prone to babbling vivid fantasies, distorted dreams, and false memories engineered to please the interrogator. The subject will tell you whatever their sedated mind concocts, rendering the resulting transcript completely useless for actual intelligence gathering or legal verification. This complete misunderstanding of cognitive reliability reaches an equally dangerous point when we evaluate the witness stand, leading us directly to the identification traps of myth number 26, the uncritical belief that eyewitness identification in police lineups or photo arrays is highly reliable, definitive proof of criminal guilt. The cinematic victim looks through a one-way mirror, points a trembling finger at suspect number 3, and the detective smiles, knowing the case is permanently closed. Let us subject the human brain to the realities of cognitive psychology. Human memory is not a digital recording device that perfectly archives past events. It is a highly reconstructive, malleable, and easily contaminated biological process. Under the extreme stress of a violent crime, a phenomenon known as weapon focus occurs, where the victim's attention is entirely monopolized by the threat of death, leaving virtually zero cognitive resources to accurately record the facial features of the perpetrator. When a witness is subsequently shown a lineup, their brain naturally attempts to fill in the blanks, frequently selecting the individual who looks most generally like the criminal, a process that is often accelerated by subtle, unconscious cues from the handling detectives, explaining why eyewitness misidentification remains the single leading cause of documented wrongful convictions worldwide. The physical manipulation of trauma inside these rooms takes an equally brutal, unscientific path when characters fall unconscious, bringing us to the biological deceptions of myth number 27, the widespread cinematic doctrine that splashing a bucket of cold water on an unconscious suspect instantly wakes them up, fully coherent, alert, and ready to cooperate with the next round of questioning. The hero throws water, the villain gasps, shakes their wet hair, and immediately resumes speaking with perfect clarity. Let us apply emergency medicine to this violent trope. When a human being drops unconscious due to physical trauma, severe concussions, internal hemorrhaging, or chemical toxicity, their brain has initiated a critical defense mechanism to preserve life. Shocking a severely concussed, comatose individual with sudden ice-cold water does not restore cognitive clarity. It triggers a violent, involuntary gasp reflex that can cause them to immediately aspirate fluids into their lungs, inducing asphyxiation, while simultaneously sending their cardiovascular system into sudden, potentially fatal shock, transforming a dramatic cinematic awakening into a real-world medical emergency. Finally, we dismantle the ultimate legalistic loophole fantasy of the criminal underworld, exposing the absolute protections of myth number 28, the dangerous, highly celebrated doctrine that the constitutional protection against double jeopardy is so absolute that you can legally confess to a murder on the courthouse steps immediately after being acquitted, with absolutely no legal consequences whatsoever. The smug movie killer wins an acquittal, walks out to the cameras, brags about how they pulled off the perfect crime, and laughs in the face of the helpless prosecutor. Let us examine the actual web of overlapping legal jurisdictions. While the state court that acquitted you cannot try you again for the exact same localized charge, your public confession instantly opens a multitude of distinct legal pathways. The federal government can immediately step in and indict you under federal civil rights statutes for depriving the victim of their constitutional rights through violence. Simultaneously, the victim's family can launch a massive civil wrongful death lawsuit, where the standard of proof is far lower than a criminal trial, strip you of every penny you will ever earn, and local municipalities can hit you with separate charges for weapons violations, perjury, or conspiracy, ensuring that your dramatic courthouse performance leads you straight to a secondary prison cell. We exit the interrogation rooms and step onto the unpredictable, unpairing concrete pavements of the urban jungle to begin Part 5. Street-level fiction. A cold, clinical and forensic audit of the physics violations, ballistic illusions, and medical fantasies that Hollywood utilizes to paint the world of physical violence as a clean, highly manageable stage. The silver screen has spent a century conditioning the public to believe that the laws of gravity, thermodynamics, and human physiology flex to accommodate the dramatic needs of a hero. We initiate this street-level autopsy by venturing into the wild landscapes of classic cinema, dismantling the historical mud-bound terror of myth number 29, the absolute, terrifying belief that quicksand is a bottomless, liquid swamp of doom that will rapidly suck a human being completely beneath the earth to drown in a matter of seconds. Every vintage adventure film has subjected a character to this swampy trap, showing them thrashing wildly as the mud pulls them down past their chin. Let us apply the unyielding fluid dynamics of buoyancy to this terror. Quicksand is simply ordinary sand that has become completely saturated with water, transforming it into a highly dense, liquefied soil mixture. Because the human body is composed primarily of water, its physical density is roughly 1 gram per cubic centimeter, whereas the density of quicksand is closer to 2 grams per cubic centimeter. Under the basic laws of physics, a less dense object cannot completely sink into a more dense fluid. If you accidentally step into a pit of deep quicksand, you will only sink roughly up to your waist or chest before your body reaches a point of perfect neutral buoyancy, floating securely within the mud. The real danger of quicksand is not a sudden downward pull. It is the physical suction that makes extraction difficult, leaving careless travelers vulnerable to dehydration, exposure, or rising ocean tides if they panic, proving that Hollywood's bottomless dirt vacuum is an absolute geological impossibility. This complete disregard for human physiology transitions seamlessly from the swamp back to hand-to-hand combat, bringing us directly to the concussive deceptions of myth number 30. The incredibly common, casual cinematic assumption that pistol whipping a guard or punching a suspect out cold is a safe, completely temporary way to incapacitate them for a few hours without causing a single ounce of long-term physical damage. The silver screen protagonist walks up behind an unsuspecting guard, strikes them on the skull with the heavy barrel of a revolver, and watches them slump to the ground, fully expecting them to wake up a few hours later with nothing more than a minor headache. Let us subject this casual violence to the grim realities of clinical neurotrauma. Human physiology does not possess a convenient standby switch. If a traumatic blow to the head delivers enough kinetic force to disrupt the brain's reticular activating system and cause an immediate loss of consciousness that lasts for more than a few fleeting seconds, the victim has not safely gone to sleep. They have sustained a severe, life-threatening traumatic brain injury. This level of concussive force routinely fractures the skull, tears delicate cerebral blood vessels, and induces massive, rapid subdural hematomas that pool blood inside the cranium, crushing vital brain tissue. The person left unconscious on the concrete is frequently balancing on the thin edge of permanent cognitive impairment, paraplegia, or brain death, transforming a clean cinematic shortcut into a horrific medical emergency. The search for a clean chemical shortcut to physical compliance takes an equally ridiculous path when we examine the toolkits of movie kidnappers, dismantling the fast-acting illusions of myth number 31. The widespread belief that holding a chloroform-soaked rag over a victim's mouth instantly puts them to sleep in 2 seconds flat, keeping them fully unconscious for several hours. The cinematic agent creeps up, presses a cloth to the target's face, and within a single gasp, the target goes limp, allowing for a quiet, effortless abduction. Let us analyze the actual chemical parameters of this volatile anesthetic. Chloroform is an incredibly slow, highly finicky compound. Inducing a state of surgical unconsciousness using chloroform requires the subject to deeply and continuously inhale the concentrated vapors for several consecutive minutes, not seconds. More importantly, the therapeutic window for chloroform is terrifyingly narrow and unstable. If the concentration is slightly too low, the target merely experiences mild dizziness and fights back aggressively. If the dose is slightly too high, the chemical instantly paralyzes the target's respiratory system or triggers fatal cardiac arrhythmias, stopping their heart on the spot. Maintaining a precise state of safe, stable unconsciousness requires a highly trained anesthesiologist monitoring vital signs in an operating room, rendering the instant movie rag an absolute chemical fantasy. The complete misunderstanding of physical ballistics reaches an equally dangerous point when characters seek cover during a gunfight, bringing us directly to the defensive illusions of myth number 32, the dogmatic assertion that standard car doors are highly effective, bulletproof shields that can easily block high-velocity handgun and rifle ammunition. The movie detective ducks behind the open door of their cruiser, using the thin sheet metal as a secure wall while bullets bounce harmlessly off the exterior paint. Let us apply material science and ballistics to the anatomy of a modern automobile. Standard consumer vehicle doors are constructed from incredibly thin sheet steel or aluminum, backed by interior layers of cheap plastic trim, electrical wiring, and sound-dampening foam. To a modern defensive handgun round, let alone a high-velocity rifle cartridge, this combination offers about as much resistance as thick cardboard. A standard bullet will slice through the exterior paneling, pass through the interior components, exit the inside of the door, and strike the occupant behind it, with more than enough remaining kinetic energy to inflict fatal wounds. The only part of a standard automobile that offers genuine, reliable ballistic protection is the heavy, dense cast iron or aluminum engine block located under the hood, proving that relying on a standard car door for cover is a fatal tactical mistake engineered solely for dramatic visual blocking. This disregard for automotive chemistry takes an even flashier turn when those same vehicles are shot at, leading us straight to the combustive deceptions of myth number 33, the universal cinematic law that shooting a vehicle's gasoline tank causes it to ignite instantly, blowing the entire car up into a massive, theatrical fireball. The hero fires a single pistol round into the rear fender, the tank sparks, and the vehicle is instantly launched into the air by a spectacular explosion. Let us expose the strict engineering parameters of combustion. Liquid gasoline is actually not explosive on its own. It requires a precise, highly volatile air-to-fuel ratio mixed with oxygen to ignite dynamically. When a standard lead or copper-jacketed bullet punches through a vehicle's metal fuel tank, it simply leaves a hole, causing the liquid fuel to rapidly leak out onto the pavement. The passing bullet does not generate enough sustained thermal energy or an open flame to ignite the damp liquid inside the oxygen-depleted tank. Even if an incendiary or tracer round is utilized, without the perfect vapor mix, you will merely get a localized fire rather than a catastrophic cinematic detonation, proving that the instant vehicular fireball is a complete theatrical fabrication designed to keep special effects teams employed. The medical misinterpretations of the street-level scene reach an equally profound crisis when we enter the ambulance, bringing us to the cardiological illusions of myth number 34, the near-universal medical doctrine that defibrillator paddles are used to shock a completely flat-lined, dead heart back into an active, healthy beating rhythm. The monitor emits a flat, continuous tone indicating asystole. The cinematic doctor yells, "Clear," slams the paddles onto the chest, and the patient's heart miraculously jump-starts like a stalled engine. Let us correct basic clinical cardiology. A defibrillator cannot jump-start a heart that has completely stopped beating. When a patient is flatlined, there is zero electrical activity occurring within the cardiac muscle, and sending a massive jolt of electricity through a dead heart will do absolutely nothing but cause severe tissue burns. The actual purpose of defibrillation is the exact opposite. It is designed to temporarily stun a heart that is still alive but experiencing an erratic, chaotic electrical storm, such as ventricular fibrillation, where the muscle is fluttering uselessly instead of pumping blood. By shocking the fluttering heart, the machine completely stops all electrical activity for a split second, allowing the body's natural pacemaker to reset and restore a regular rhythm, meaning that the ultimate cinematic cure for a stopped heart is actually a tool designed for a rapidly twitching one. Finally, we dismantle the ultimate laboratory shortcut of the street-level investigation, exposing the toxicological miracles of myth number 35. The widespread belief that forensic toxicologists can identify any exotic poison, drug, or chemical compound instantly by simply injecting a raw blood sample into a single, high-tech machine that prints out the answer in seconds. The cinematic scientist places a vial into a slot, a digital bar loads, and the screen instantly flashes the word ricin or arsenic. Let us look at the grueling, multi-layered realities of analytical chemistry. There is no single universal machine that can scan raw blood for every known molecule. Identifying a foreign substance requires separate, highly methodical extraction processes for different chemical classes, utilizing an array of distinct instruments including gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and liquid chromatography. Each specific test requires the chemist to isolate the target compound from a messy biological matrix of blood proteins and lipids, a painstaking laboratory process that takes weeks of manual preparation, verification, and calibration, showing that Hollywood's instant poison scanner is a complete bureaucratic illusion designed to compress weeks of scientific labor into a convenient 5-second plot point. We ascend finally to the absolute apex of bureaucratic authority to begin Part 6, the federal illusion, a cold, clinical, and definitive autopsy of the institutional borders, legal monopolies, and corporate prison structures that govern the modern justice system. In this final chapter, we pull back the administrative curtain to reveal how the global legal apparatus has been systematically optimized not as a grand moral crusade for absolute truth, but as a highly calculated corporate ecosystem designed to manage human behavior as a profitable, long-term transaction. We initiate this final forensic audit by dismantling the foundational jurisdictional boast of myth number 36, the deeply entrenched, universally celebrated claim that federal agencies like the FBI can instantly sweep into any local murder scene, aggressively flash their badges, seize all police files, and unilaterally take over the investigation. Every cinematic detective has been shoved aside by a smug federal agent who barks that the case now belongs to Washington. Let us consult the rigid parameters of statutory law. The United States operates on a strict system of dual sovereignty. Local police departments and state authorities possess exclusive jurisdiction over localized crimes, including over 95% of homicides. The FBI possesses absolutely no legal authority to seize control of a local investigation unless a clear, explicit federal statute has been violated, such as bank robbery, kidnapping across state lines, or civil rights violations. Without that specific federal trigger or a formal written invitation from the local police chief, a federal agent who attempts to confiscate files or boss around local detectives is legally nothing more than an armed trespasser committing an administrative felony, turning Hollywood's grand federal takeover into a complete jurisdictional hallucination. This inflation of investigative authority reaches an equally absurd peak when we look at private enterprise, bringing us directly to the civilian illusions of myth number 37, the streetwise, highly romanticized doctrine that private investigators are rogue, licensed detectives who possess full police authority, including the legal right to execute search warrants, demand information, and make official arrests. The cinematic private eye kicks down doors, steals diaries from desk drawers, and corners suspects at gunpoint, operating under the naive assumption that their investigator's card grants them immunity from the law. Let us expose the stark civil boundaries of the private investigator. In the eyes of the criminal justice system, a private investigator possesses absolutely no more legal authority than an ordinary citizen, a grocery clerk, or a passing pedestrian. A private investigator cannot legally trespass on private property, cannot wiretap a phone line without consent, cannot run restricted government license plate databases, and cannot make a custodial arrest without facing severe, long-term felony charges for breaking and entering, stalking, and kidnapping. Their primary tool is not a legal badge, but a camera operated from a public sidewalk, proving that the rogue, all-powerful private eye is a pure fiction, engineered to give ordinary civilians the dramatic weight of a state prosecutor. The complete misunderstanding of legal protection takes an even more dangerous turn when we look at basic public safety, leading us straight to the civil liability traps of myth number 38, the dangerous, highly comforting belief that Good Samaritan laws protect helpful citizens from all legal and financial liability, regardless of what medical procedures they attempt on strangers during an emergency. We have watched the cinematic hero slice open a choking victim's throat with a ballpoint pen in a crowded restaurant, assuming that their good intentions insulate them from the courts. Let us subject this heroic myth to the harsh chemistry of tort law. Good Samaritan statutes are strictly limited frameworks designed solely to protect ordinary citizens who render basic, reasonable, and non-invasive first aid, such as performing standard chest compressions, applying a basic tourniquet, or calling emergency services. The moment an untrained civilian steps outside the bounds of basic first aid to attempt complex, unauthorized surgical maneuvers, invasive medical procedures, or volatile drug administrations, the legal shield completely vanishes. The helpful citizen is instantly exposed to ruinous, multi-million-dollar civil lawsuits for medical malpractice, battery, and wrongful death, showing that the law demands rational restraint over dramatic cinema heroism. This complete disregard for structural boundaries reaches a highly comical extreme when characters look up at a ceiling, bringing us to the architectural deceptions of myth number 39, the widespread, highly persistent belief that anyone can easily crawl through standard building air vents and commercial duct systems to silently bypass high-security systems, laser grids, and locked vault doors. The action star unscrews a vent grate, slips into a pristine, spacious metal tunnel, and slides silently across the building unnoticed. Let us apply basic mechanical engineering and architecture to this cinematic pathway. Commercial heating, ventilation, and air conditioning ducts are not spacious, empty corridors designed for human travel. They are incredibly narrow, dark, and claustrophobic spaces engineered exclusively to transport air currents. The interior of these sheet metal tubes is a minefield of razor-sharp sheet metal edges, long structural screws protruding directly into the center, and thick layers of toxic, fan-blown industrial dust. More importantly, these lightweight metal ducts are held together by thin aluminium joints and suspended from the ceiling by flimsy wire brackets that are engineered to hold only the weight of the air itself. The moment a full-grown human being crawls into the system, the metal will buckle with a deafening, building-wide metallic boom before the entire structure completely collapses under human weight, dropping the intruder directly onto the security guards below. The technological manipulation of privacy laws reaches an equally volatile peak when we examine police surveillance, bringing us to the investigative illusions of myth number 40. The modern doctrine that police wiretaps can be deployed instantly by a rogue detective splicing a telephone wire in a dark alleyway or clicking a button on a laptop without a warrant. The renegade cop listens to the suspect's calls, using the gathered intel to stay one step ahead of the gang. Let us expose the strict constitutional walls surrounding electronic surveillance. Under Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act, wiretaps represent the single most legally restricted investigative tool in the entire law enforcement arsenal. Securing a wiretap requires an incredibly high legal threshold that far exceeds a standard search warrant. A prosecutor must prove to a senior federal or state judge that all ordinary investigative techniques have completely failed, and the resulting warrant must be signed with strict limitations. Every single intercepted call must be methodically minimized, meaning the moment a suspect discusses non-criminal activity, the police are legally mandated to turn off the recording. The entire process is subjected to exhaustive weekly judicial audits, and a single unauthorized splice or rogue recording will result in the immediate suppression of all evidence, the total collapse of the entire prosecution, and federal criminal charges for the handling detectives. This systemic reliance on immediate, dramatic shortcuts is perfectly mirrored in the crisis management genre, bringing us straight to the psychological deceptions of myth number 41. The widespread, highly trusting belief that professional hostage negotiators can easily diffuse high-stakes standoffs using fast-paced psychological tricks, clever manipulation, or slick reverse psychology. The movie negotiator grabs a bullhorn, tells the captor a clever joke, demands a helicopter, and resolves the entire crisis in a 10-minute battle of wits. Let us restore the exhausting reality of crisis negotiation. True hostage negotiation is an incredibly slow, grueling, and methodical process that relies entirely on active listening, behavioral change stairways, and the slow, deliberate reduction of human adrenaline. Negotiators do not use fast-paced tricks or confrontational manipulation, which actively triggers panic and violence. Instead, they spend hours, sometimes days, speaking in calm, measured tones, actively validating emotions, and building an exhausting, empathetic trust with the perpetrator to slowly lower their biological fight-or-flight response, transforming Hollywood's rapid psychological chess match into a marathon of administrative patience. This brings us to the ultimate, most chilling realization of the entire criminal justice apparatus, shattering the foundational humanitarian lie of myth number 42. The absolute, sacred belief that the ultimate strategic design of modern penal systems and high-security prisons is the successful rehabilitation, behavioral correction, and permanent social reintegration of offenders. We are told to view the prison system as a correctional institution, trusting that its grand purpose is to return reformed citizens to the community. Let us shatter this ultimate structural illusion. Under the cold, mathematical laws of global carceral capitalism, a completely rehabilitated, permanently integrated former offender is a lost source of revenue. Conversely, a prison population that permanently empties represents a total financial disaster for the multi-billion-dollar private carceral complex. The modern penal matrix, comprising private prison conglomerates, industrial carceral suppliers, specialized security manufacturers, and state guard unions, is financially sustained by the continuous, highly predictable maintenance of high occupancy rates. The ideal economic product of this matrix is not a reformed soul. It is a recurring inmate who cycles through the system every few years, ensuring that corporate beds remain filled and government subsidies remain secure. By treating the human soul as a biological cash flow asset, the modern carceral industry has created a perfect, self-perpetuating system where recidivism is not a systemic failure, but a vital, highly lucrative business model designed to turn the human body into the ultimate, multi-decade cash flow annuity, proving that the greatest legal myth of all is the belief that a system built on the monetization of punishment could ever truly want you to be free.